Hello everyone, this is Frank DiMora with the End Times Research Ministry. I just noticed that there was a comment that was left concerning the third temple. I did a YouTube video about the third temple that will be built in the last days. And there was a comment that was left by Omega Ministries, and I want to address the comment to the Omega Ministries. And Omega Ministries said that there would be no third temple built. Now in their comment they cite John 2 verse 21. Let me tell you what John 2:21 actually states. But the temple he had spoken of was his body. Now in this prophecy Jesus was not referring to a literal temple that the Pharisees and the Sadducees thought that he was talking about. Jesus was telling them that he was going to raise his body from the dead in 3 days. The Pharisees and the Sadducees even stated in verse 20, they replied, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you're going to raise it up in 3 days?" But the temple that he spoke of was his body. The reason they said 46 years was that was the exact time that it took to build the temple. However, this prophecy had nothing to do with the prophecy Jesus refers to back in the Old Testament in Daniel chapter 9. I want to quote verse 27. "He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end," now get this, "to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him." This prophecy was for the future, when the Antichrist would rise up and literally go inside a new temple that was to be built in the last days. The prophecy was for a time when the sacrifices and offerings would again begin to take place. Now keep in mind, when Jesus told the Pharisees and the Sadducees that he was going to raise his body in 3 days, the Jews already were doing sacrifices and offerings. We know for sure that those sacrifices and offerings stopped in 70 AD when the Jews were destroyed and their temple was also destroyed, just as Jesus warned that it would. Now there hasn't been any sacrifices and offerings since the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. However, as Jesus pointed to the future temple and even pointed to what Daniel said, take a look at Matthew chapter 24, verse 15, for example. And I'm going to quote him. It says this, "So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader," get this, "understand." And notice the abomination that causes desolation can only take place when this holy place, or if you will, third temple, is built. Now, when is this? Again, when the Antichrist comes. The Antichrist comes at the beginning of the tribulation, which happens in the last days. Now, these warnings by Jesus and Daniel are about to happen, as for the first time since Israel was born again, the Jews are already practicing. They're not actually doing the actual sacrifices, but they are practicing the animal sacrifices, and they are now pressing to build a third temple. Now, if Omega Ministry tries to say that Antiochus Epiphanes fulfilled the Daniel prophecy, you need to take a look at what Matthew chapter 24 verse 15 says. Now, as far as Matthew chapter 24 verse 15, Jesus was speaking some 200 years after the abomination of desolation described above had already occurred. So Jesus must have been prophesying that sometime in the future another abomination of desolation would occur in a Jewish temple in, obviously, Jerusalem. Now, most Bible prophecy interpreters believe that Jesus was referring to the Antichrist, who will do something very similar to what Antiochus Epiphanes did when he sacrificed those pigs on the altar. Now, this is confirmed by the fact that some of what Daniel prophesied in Daniel 9:27, understand this, did not occur in 167 BC with Antiochus Epiphanes. Athanasius did not, understand, did not confirm a covenant with Israel for 7 years. It is the Antichrist who in the end times will establish a covenant with Israel for 7 years and then break it by doing something similar to the abomination, desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel. Now, one thing to consider here is, why would Jesus literally point to what Daniel said? Is because he's showing us what is going to take place in the future. In the temple is where Athanasius Epiphanes did the abomination of desolation and sacrificing those pigs. So when the Lord Jesus tells us that there's going to be a holy place in the last days, and he points to Daniel, we know that that temple was standing, and we know that there will be another abomination of desolation again in the future when a temple is built. And this is the reason why I'm watching the Temple Mount Institute so closely, because they have already brought back, as I mentioned in that video, they brought back the Leviticus priests who at one time did the sacrifices so many years ago. We haven't seen those for almost 2,000 years. We saw recently the reestablishment of the Sanhedrin, which we haven't seen for almost 2,000 years. And we just saw the Sanhedrin pick a high priest, which hasn't been around for almost 2,000 years. And if you think that all these events are coincidence, you would be mistaken. What you're looking at in current events is the road to fulfill these prophecies. So what we know from current events is it's leaning directly on the narrow road to exactly what Jesus Christ points to back to Daniel. The abomination, desolation, spoken by Daniel and referred to by Jesus Christ. And that's why I believe when Jesus said, let him understand. Because when we look back and we see the likeness of what Athanasius Epiphanes did, and he didn't fulfill all those prophecies, we know for sure a man is coming, the Antichrist, who will fulfill all of what the prophecy Jesus talked about. Now, just in case you just found my YouTube channel, I'd like to invite you to go over to my website. The website is endtimesresearchministry.com. And once you go over there, you'll have access to my prophecy book called The Last Chronicles of Planet Earth. It's an in-depth look concerning current events and the warnings that the Lord gave to us concerning these Bible prophecies. And you will see step by step through the whole book, which again you can get for free. I've never charged anybody for anything I've ever done in the ministry, and I'll continue to do that until the Lord takes me home or we get raptured. But take advantage of my free book, The Last Chronicles of Planet Earth. You'll see a host of information with all the different prophecies, not just the temple, but you'll see all of the different chapters that focus and give you very specific information about these different events and the prophecies related to these current events that you're watching on the news. And most of the people who are watching the news, they don't have the capacity to join both the current events and the prophecies together because they haven't been reading the Bible. They don't know the prophecies, and therefore when they see the events taking place on the news, there's no connection. And what my ministry does is connect the current events with what Christ has warned to us both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Let me just say this. It's my joy to do the Lord's work. It's my joy to give everything away for free. And I want nothing from anyone. I've never asked, as I said, and I never will. All I want is you to be able to go to my site, click that link, and download that book today for free. Make up your own mind. I've given you all of the information necessary for you to understand that what God has shown us is actually come to pass in our generation. And if you haven't read Matthew chapter 24, I know that I've given you some of that information today in chapter 24, but you should go back and read the entire text in chapter 24, where the Lord outlines specifically the things that we should be looking for in the last days. And my book just expounds on every one of those prophecies and even more. So again, this is my joy to give to you something for free, which you're not going to see very often from any ministry. You don't have to be concerned about me asking anything from you. That's what I'm not about. I'm about doing the same thing that Jesus Christ did, and he gave it away for free. He talked to the people, he told them his word, and that's what I'm doing. I'm giving the Lord's word for free. God bless you. This is Frank DiMora with the End Times Research Ministry.